Oh my God, are the kids putting on a play from the refrigerator? William froze at the kitchen doorway. His triplets, born deaf, stood in a row, their hands moving in rhythm with the steady vibration pulsing from the old fridge door. Vegetables became characters, laughter burst forth after years of silence, and their New York apartment suddenly turned into a tiny stage. But when William opened the fridge, between cartons of milk and the frosted freezer, a forgotten letter appeared, a handwritten note from Emily, his late wife. And inside that letter was something that could change everything. The refrigerator door rattled with a steady clack-clack, like an old instrument suddenly waking up. The yellow bulb flickered inside, blending with the vibration to form an odd rhythm. Aaliyah squinted with a grin, skillfully sticking colorful magnets onto the cold steel surface, then propped a carrot upright as the main character of the stage. Beside it, a large potato became the monster, with eyes cut from plastic bottle caps. The triplets huddled close, eyes wide, eager for the story to begin. Their small hands quickly joined in. Noah added a long cucumber as the sword of defense. Ethan arranged bright red tomatoes into loyal companions, while little Morgan stubbornly balanced a trembling onion to become a tiny dragon. The New York kitchen, usually cold and lifeless, now pulsed with a vibrant world born of vegetables and imagination. Aaliyah tapped her foot against the floor, drumming lightly on the fridge door. The vibration echoed, bouncing into the hanging pots and pans, creating a lopsided but lively beat. The children burst into giggles, then began signing with their hands. The gestures were no longer disjointed but flowed like dialogue. The carrot hero rushed to save the little tomato, the potato monster swayed furiously, and the onion dragon suddenly toppled over, sending the audience into fits of laughter. William appeared in the doorway, frozen in place. He had only meant to grab some coffee, but now he stood still, like a spectator who had wandered into a strange theater. He saw his children not as silent shadows drifting down hallways, but alive storytelling, sharing joy through a language he could not fully speak but could unmistakably feel. A warm surge rose in his chest. He was used to thick contracts and cold numbers on screens, but never to a performance built of potatoes, carrots, and the rattling hum of an old refrigerator. He pressed a hand to his lips, holding back a smile he hadn't worn in far too long. Morgan spotted his father in the doorway and waved, beckoning. But instead of calling out, he raised the onion dragon high, his eyes sparkling as if to say, "Dad, you have to see this part too." William faltered, stepping back half a pace, then stood rooted, his heart tightening. In that moment, the tiny kitchen became a miniature Broadway. No other audience, no stage lights, only 3 deaf children, a patient young woman, a few vegetables, and a trembling refrigerator. Yet somehow, the play carried more power than any performance William had ever funded. The penthouse high above New York, once so hollow, now throbbed with life. Not with music, but with pure laughter blended with metallic rhythm. Not with actors, but with little hands shaping a story in silence the outside world could never truly understand. Aaliyah tilted her head, watching the children with the pride of a director. Sweat dotted her cheekbones, but her smile glowed. In her eyes, William read something he barely dared to believe, a genuine hope. He still did not step inside, remaining half in shadow, half in the light spilling from the fridge. And his heart asked, was this just a fleeting children's game, or the first step towards something he had lost for far too long, the laughter of family? And before we continue the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from, we'd love to know. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the penthouse, spilling across the cold marble floor. But unlike every other day, the kitchen no longer echoed with the dry hum of the coffee machine. Instead, there was Aaliyah, fixing a new row of magnets and turning the refrigerator door into an official stage. The triplets clustered around her, their eyes glowing. Noah tugged on Ethan's sleeve, signed a quick idea, and both nodded like little scriptwriters. Morgan, The youngest busied himself arranging scraps of vegetables like a backstage director. When a potato rolled off the counter and hit the floor, they collapsed in laughter, tumbling across the tiles. Without words, they plotted in sign language. Small hands carved circles in the air, cut sharp gestures, bounced with rhythmic shakes, all weaving into a script language only they could understand. Aaliyah stood nearby, watching, occasionally tapping the fridge door to keep time. Clack, clack. The vibrations spread across the room, like the opening drum of a play. Today's story was more complex. The carrot had become a warrior, wielding a cucumber sword. The tiny tomato was crowned as the kidnapped princess, and the potato remained the hulking monster. Morgan suddenly threw in a purple onion as the witch, forcing his brothers to improvise. Signing so quickly, even Aaliyah burst out laughing, unable to keep up. The refrigerator stage became a classroom. When a sign wasn't quite right, Noah patiently corrected it. Ethan, usually shy, grew bold, his eyes glowing as he performed. Morgan laughed so hard he hiccuped, collapsing every time the onion witch toppled dramatically onto the tiles. The children's laughter, silent to the world, still rang through the apartment with an energy words could never capture. William, watching from the doorway, saw it all. He didn't step in, but every morning, his strides slowed, his pauses stretched longer. At first, he told himself, it's just a game. But then he saw them debate, saw their eyes shine as they invented new signs, saw their unity as they built stories together. What began as an improvised game had become a living lesson about communication, joy, and the bond of siblings. Aaliyah never imposed. She was simply the quiet narrator, keeping rhythm with her tapping, tossing in a smile or playful shrug. She let the children lead, let imagination set the path. The penthouse, once lavish but hollow, now brimmed with a new kind of music. The music of gestures, glances, and delight. Once, Morgan broke script, forgetting a sign they'd agreed upon. Instead of stopping, he flailed nonsense signs, sending Noah and Ethan into uncontrollable giggles, Aaliyah doubling over, while the heroic carrot rolled abandoned under the fridge. From the hallway shadows, William let out a laugh, short, hoarse, awkward, but real. Morning after morning, the vegetable plays grew longer, richer with meaning. The triplets, once only mimicking motions, now spun stories of their own. Every sign was a line of dialogue, every fridge rattle was a sound effect, and in a high-rise apartment overlooking the endless stream of New York traffic, a simple stage was quietly transforming a family. And William, though he hadn't admitted it yet, began to wonder, could an ordinary refrigerator door become the doorway to a true world between him and his children, where joy was no longer a luxury? Late afternoon, the last light of day slanted across New York's high-rises, stretching shadows into the penthouse. William stepped into the kitchen, not intending to join the fridge stage. His triplets were still absorbed in, only wanting some ice for his glass of wine. But when he bent down to open the freezer, something made him freeze. Behind the milk carton and frozen packs, wedged against the frost-covered wall, was a thin envelope. Its edges curled, slightly damp, the paper yellowed, as if it had been lying there for years. His heart pounded, his hand trembling as he pulled it free and wiped away the frost. Handwriting appeared so familiar it pierced him, the soft, right-leaning strokes, each line trembling as though it still carried the breath of the writer. William knew instantly. Emily. He collapsed into the chair by the dining table, the envelope quivering in his hand. The children kept laughing in front of the fridge, unaware that in this very moment, a piece of their mother's memory had been unearthed. Slowly, William opened the flap, the paper whispering as it slid free. The faded words emerged. If the day ever comes when I can't be with you, remember this. Laugh in any way you can, even if you can't hear with your ears. Laughter is the only language every heart understands. His vision blurred. Simple words, yet heavy as stone. Emily had written them before leaving this world, before the apartment became a castle of silence. The letter, unread and forgotten in some hurried move, had slept for years in the freezer. William pressed the paper to his chest, memories flooding back. He saw Emily, hair tied high, humming softly in the tiny apartment they once rented after their wedding. He saw her cradling each newborn, pressing their ears to her chest so they could feel her heartbeat instead of music. He heard her voice again, not for their ears, but for their bodies to sense and their souls to carry. He shook. For years, he had built walls of discipline, burying himself in work to numb the pain. Yet, these few lines shattered all those walls. He remembered Emily's smile, gentle, powerful enough to shift the world. And now she was reminding him, let the children laugh, in any way possible. The kitchen blurred through his tears. He felt as though Emily herself had stepped out of the fridge, handing him the letter and whispering, "You were never alone." Looking ahead, he saw his 3 children immersed in their vegetable play, their hands signing stories in the air. They laughed in the silent language Emily had once taught them. They were already walking the path she had hoped for. He was the only one left behind. William clutched the letter, torn between grief and hope. It felt like a second chance, yet fear gripped him. If Emily had left this reminder, could he still justify holding back, keeping his heart closed to their laughter? A loud giggle erupted. Morgan's purple onion had tumbled to the floor, rolling into the table leg. William chuckled through his tears. He knew Emily, wherever she was smiling at this very scene. But deep inside, a question rose. Would he have the courage to turn Emily's words into reality, or let them sleep forgotten once again? All right, my dear viewers, if you're watching and finding this story moving, drop a comment with the number 1 or write, "I'm still here to keep listening." The clang of a spoon hitting the marble floor rang out like a gunshot. The youngest child had dropped their soup spoon, startled as William suddenly shoved his chair back, its wooden legs scraping harshly across the floor. Dinner, once alive with wordless laughter, froze solid. William rose, his hand clenching the crumpled envelope. To him now, the letter was no longer a gift from memory, but proof of intrusion. His eyes locked on Aaliyah, cold and metallic. He convinced himself only she had enough time in the kitchen to stumble upon or deliberately uncover the letter. The thought looped endlessly in his head. She dug too deep. Aaliyah sat still, hands tightening around the edge of her napkin. Her warm brown eyes were veiled in sorrow. She knew he was misunderstanding, yet her lips stayed closed. In the cavernous dining room, the silence pressed so heavily that even the ticking clock seemed accusatory. The children looked from father to her, sensing what they could not fully grasp. Their hands, usually fluent in signs, faltered midair, then dropped. The joy that had just begun flickered out like a candle snuffed too soon. William turned away, striding out of the dining room. Each step pounded in his chest like a hammer. He hurled himself into his office, slamming the door, pressing his back against the wood as if to shut out the world. In his grip, the letter trembled not from the paper, but from his shaking hands. He collapsed into his leather chair. Papers, contracts, millions in figures covered his desk, suddenly meaningless. His heart was a trapped beast lashing out in anger. Because if he admitted the letter was a miracle, he would also have to admit that he'd missed his children's laughter for years. That truth hurt more than any loss. In the dim office, William pressed the letter against his face. Emily's image rushed back, her gentle laughter, her hand tapping rhythm on their children's chests, her eyes urging him to soften. But memory collided with reality. He sat here alone, while 3 children outside were likely bewildered by their father's sudden storm. At the dining table, Aaliyah quietly cleared dishes. Her movements were slow, not from resentment, but because she knew a storm had just passed and someone had to pick up the pieces. The look she gave William before he left, sad but without blame, still burned in his mind. The triplets huddled together, heads resting on each other's shoulders in silence. Dinner remained unfinished, soup still steaming, but their hunger was gone. Only coldness lingered, as if the warmth they'd just reclaimed had evaporated in a moment. In his office, William pressed the letter to his chest like a wound he dared not open. His breath came ragged, eyes squeezed shut, as though wishing memory itself would dissolve. But Emily's handwriting, her final words, seared bright in his mind. They would not let him forget. Outside, New York's laughter rose from the streets. Down below, thousands lived, loved, laughed. But up here, in the sky-high apartment, one family had slipped from each other's arms once again. And deep inside, William wondered, had he just pushed away his one chance to mend the fragile thread tying him to his children? The clock's hands struck heavy beats in the office, the second hand slicing through the silence like an invisible blade. Beyond the glass, New York glowed in neon, cars streaming below in a blur of light, but inside the high-rise room, William sat frozen like stone. The letter lay open on the desk. The lamp cast its glow across the wrinkled edges, the ink smeared in places like old tears. He had held it for hours, yet hadn't dared read it again. The anger from earlier had ebbed, leaving only a hollow space that suffocated him. At last, William drew a deep breath and pulled the page closer. His eyes lingered on each word, each line, missing nothing. And what pierced him most was not what Emily had written, but what she hadn't. There was no mention of illness, no lament of separation, no reproach for a husband too consumed by work, no resentment for the hours he hadn't been by her side. Only gentle pleas, light as air. Let the children laugh in any way. Laughter is the only language every heart understands. His vision blurred. He forced himself to read on, though each word cut deeper into his chest. At the bottom, Emily had written, "If you forget, let someone remind you." A sharp breath caught in his throat. His head bowed, hands trembling as he crushed the page as though it might vanish. These were not simply words, they were a map, a lantern for the darkness he had wandered in too long. William suddenly saw that his fury was only the shadow of fear. Fear that he wasn't good enough, patient enough, loving enough to be a father. He had buried that weakness under work, wealth, and discipline. And when Aaliyah arrived, breaking the silence with clumsy, life-filled games, his confusion had lashed out as coldness. But now, Emily's instructions were unmistakable. She had written them as if she foresaw each stumble he would make. And the one to remind him, wasn't it Aaliyah? He remembered her in the kitchen, tapping her foot against the fridge door, her eyes alight as the children laughed. A young woman with no status, no power, yet with patience and warmth she had revived what he thought was gone forever. William leaned back, tears running freely. They no longer burned bitter, but softened, as if at last he allowed himself to breathe. That night, for the first time since losing Emily, he let his frail heart show itself. Outside, the wind scraped past the glass. Inside, the desk lamp trembled against the letter. William pressed it to his chest as though embracing Emily one final time. And yet, another fear crept in. If Aaliyah truly was the one to remind him Emily had left behind, would he have the courage to believe it? Or would he retreat once more, walling himself inside the past? The question hovered in the quiet room, leaving William restless, unable to close his eyes. Are you still here, my dear audience? Take a short break, maybe a sip of water, then stay with me for the rest of this story. Comment 1 if you're finding it gripping, and don't forget to hit subscribe. The creak of metal echoed as William dragged the old refrigerator out from the kitchen wall, planting it right in the center of the vast living room. Dust swirled in the morning light pouring through the glass windows, turning the scene into something chaotic yet strangely theatrical, like backstage preparations for a play. The triplets stared wide-eyed, mouths open. Aaliyah froze too, clutching a dish towel in both hands, unable to believe that the once-cold millionaire was now kneeling to lay flattened cartons across the floor. Without a word of explanation, William set to work building a mini-stage. Cardboard boxes stacked into walls, flashlights taped in place to mimic stage lights, and a white tablecloth draped as a curtain that swayed gently whenever the AC blew past like a velvet drape in a tiny theater. The heavy tension of the night before melted, replaced by a spark of anticipation. Drawn as if by magic, the children rushed to help their father. Noah tugged Ethan toward rolls of colored paper. Morgan clutched markers and eagerly scribbled masks for their vegetable actors. Their small hands flew, signing ideas back and forth in a flurry of silent scriptwriting. Aaliyah quietly set the towel down and stepped forward, securing the makeshift curtain with clothespins. By late morning, the penthouse living room had become a pocket-sized theater. Flashlight beams shimmered across marble floors, and the old refrigerator transformed into a magical backdrop for their show. When it was time, the triplets squealed like an opening night audience. William no longer stood aside. He grabbed a long cucumber, raising it like a sword, a flicker of playful mischief lighting his eyes. Playing the villain, he stomped onto the stage, puffed his cheeks to growl, then threw himself down dramatically when the carrot hero pushed him back. Laughter exploded rich, unrestrained, filling every corner of the apartment. Noah and Ethan doubled over. Morgan rolled across the floor, hands signing wildly. Again! Again! William laughed with them, his voice booming, so strong it startled even him. How long had it been since he'd laughed like that? Perhaps not since before Emily was gone. From the wings, Aaliyah's eyes shimmered. Her smile was tender, her gaze glowing as if to say, this was the very moment Emily had wished for. She didn't step on stage, she stayed where she was, the witness, the keeper of it all. The play stretched on. Every clumsy tumble, every vegetable rolling off the stage became part of the performance, cheered on by the audience. William was no longer the busy millionaire, no longer the man barricaded behind his grief. He was inside the game, a teammate to his children, the father they had been waiting for. At the curtain call, the triplets turned toward him together, raising their hands in the sign they'd practiced again and again. Papa! William froze, throat tightening. The room seemed to hold its breath. He nodded, then pulled all three into his arms, no longer afraid of being vulnerable. The flashlights flickered, illuminating that embrace, no longer trembling, but steady. Watching, Aaliyah knew Emily's letter had finally come to life. Yet a quiet question stirred within her. Was this only a fleeting miracle, or the true beginning of a family reborn? The refrigerator door swung open with a soft click, and at once the dim living room filled with a wash of golden light. It was no longer the cold glow of a lifeless machine. It looked like the last burst of fireworks after a show, falling across three small faces still flushed red from laughter. The triplets stood close together, their hands rising in unison, slow, deliberate, almost like a sacred rite. The sign for Papa. Their fingers trembled but held steady, eyes locked on their father. William froze, his eyes wide, his heart shattering open. He trembled, but not from anger or fear. He lunged forward, dropped to his knees, and wrapped all three children into his chest. His breath came ragged, tears spilling faster than he could stop them. In that embrace, he was no longer the powerful millionaire, no longer the man wrapped in armor of cold restraint. He was only a father, called for the first time in the language of the heart. The children could not hear his sobs, but they felt them. They pressed their faces to his chest, catching the wild rhythm of his heartbeat, like a drum declaring a new beginning. Morgan giggled softly, brushing a tiny finger against his tear-streaked cheek, while Noah and Ethan signed it once more, as if to anchor the moment in reality. Behind them, Aaliyah stood still. She didn't step forward, only watched through damp eyes, her lips curved in a tender smile. In that blurred golden glow, she could almost see Emily present in every hug, every tear, every hand sign. Emily's presence, thought to be lost forever, was alive again in one simple thing: a smile. William loosened his arms, but still held their hands tight. He looked at them, his gaze heavy with unspoken words. And then, instead of speaking, he let his own trembling fingers form the sign, clumsy, slow but clear: Papa. The children erupted in silent joy, eyes sparkling like thousands of fireworks. They leapt into him, arms thrown around his neck like an audience embracing a performer after the final bow. Laughter silent, radiance spread through the room, so powerful that Aaliyah had to press her hand to her mouth, turning a sob into a smile. The refrigerator light kept glowing, bathing the scene like an enchanted stage. The cardboard walls, vegetable masks, and nearly drained flashlights became the perfect set for a once-in-a-lifetime performance. Yet what would be remembered wasn't the stage, but the tear on a father's face and the sign Papa shining like a star in the night. Now, sound no longer mattered. They didn't need music, didn't need words. Only the glow of the fridge, the language of hands, and the trembling arms pulling tighter. In that moment, a family had found its breath again, the rhythm they had lost for so long. Outside, New York roared on. Cars thundered, billboards flashed, neon shouted. But inside the penthouse, time held still. 3 children, a father and a patient young woman had carved out a world meant only for love. A simple moment yet strong enough to rewrite fate. Hidden in his sleeve, William clutched Emily's letter. He knew that if she could see this now, she would be smiling, because at last, her words had become real. And yet, deep in his chest, one question lingered without answer. Would this fragile resurrection endure, or was it only a fleeting spark, bound to vanish back into the long dark? The glow from the refrigerator door slowly faded, but the echoes of that play still lingered in the air. William, his eyes still wet, sat encircled by the arms of his 3 children. Aaliyah watched quietly, her heart full of both contentment and worry, because she knew one magical night wasn't enough to mend everything. Ahead lay doctor's appointments, society's judgments, and the fragility of a family that had only just rediscovered its rhythm. And yet, within that fragility, the lesson was clear. Sometimes what we need isn't a grand miracle, but a moment of true presence. An old yellow light, an improvised game, or a trembling embrace can be enough to awaken laughter that had been asleep for too long. Laughter, even without sound, has the power to heal, to connect, to remind us that love doesn't require ears to hear, only a heart to feel. Tonight's story closes with the image of the Carter family finding one another again in the glow of a refrigerator. But has the journey ended, or is it only beginning? Will Aaliyah continue to walk beside them as an irreplaceable part of their world, or will she face new doubts from the outside? And will William find the courage to open his arms wider, not only to his children, but to his own heart? If you're watching this video anywhere in America, from a small apartment in New York to a warm home in Texas, or along the shores of California, ask yourself, how long has it been since you truly sat down and listened to the laughter of those you love? Don't let it become a luxury. Share this story with family and friends, so they know that even in the darkest places, love's light can still find its way back. What do you think? Do you want to see the next chapter, part 2 of this story, where new secrets unfold and love is tested again? Leave a comment, share the video, and don't forget to subscribe. Who knows, maybe you'll find the laughter you thought was lost.